Have you heard of Diego Rivera, Siqueiros, or Orozco? What about street art? Well, join me on this episode of Soul Radio with J.D. Estrada as we dive in to the evolution of murals. Stay tuned.
Raise your frequency, feel the energy rise, body strong, soul awake, spirit open wide, health and wellness, art and culture flow. Tune your heart, tune your mind, let the good vibes grow with J.D. Estrada. We're living in the light. On Radio Phonica USA, balance your
Welcome to Raise Your Frequency with J.D. Estrada. This is a space where body, soul, and spirit come into balance, where health and wellness meet art and culture, and creativity becomes a pathway to healing and awareness. Take a breath, center yourself, and open your mind. You're tuned into Radio Phonica USA. Let's begin raising your frequency.
Well, once again, welcome to Raise Your Frequency here on Radiophonica USA, where we play soldies, oldies, boleros, and a little bit of everything. So when you want to hear a playlist, it's our playlist. Just go to Zeno Radio and download the app, and you can listen to us 24/7. So today we have a very special episode. Again, my name is J.D. Estrada. I am a painter, an artist, and a muralist for many, many years. Painted many, many murals, and we'll talk about all the murals that I painted along with some of my perspective and my view about it. So don't go away. Let me play one jam for you. Los Alvarados. Yo soy Chicano. All right, that was Yo Soy Chicano by Los Alvarados. So let's just get into this. Today we're talking about from Siqueiros to street art, the evolution of murals. So what we're going to do today is going to be a sort of like a double, if you want to say a double discussion, where I'm going to discuss a lot about the history of murals in the U.S. along with my perspective or my view, because I've been around for a while and I've been a part of the mural and public art in Los Angeles for quite a while. I used to work for Culture Affairs, so I worked on the murals, and I worked under Al Nodal through Culture Affairs, so I know a little bit about what's happening with the process of mural making, both legally and protectively, as well as what happens in the community. So first of all, let's get into what is a mural. For those of you that don't know, what is a mural? A mural is, it could also be a fresco, but it's a painting that is on the wall that is painted on the inside or the outside of a building. A lot of people call airbrush murals on cars murals, but that's not a mural. That's a painting on a car. Sometimes the new technique now is putting paintings on canvas and then gluing them on the wall, and that can be a mural because it's being put on the wall. So that's a mural. So really quick to talk about where does murals originate from. We can go as far back as the caves of the caveman, but we're not going to go that far. We're going to go and start with the Native Americans when they would do rock murals and rock paintings, as well as a lot of indigenous cultures like the Mayans, the Aztecas, the Toltecas, even some of the Europeans like the Greeks. They used a method called frescoes, or they just what a fresco is, for those of you guys don't know, is when the pigment of the paint is mixed into the plaster. And so sections of a wall are prepped, and then the plaster is applied with pigment. So the ink, it's almost like a wall tattoo. So the ink gets directly embedded into the wall, not on the surface, but embedded into the surface of the wall, making this mural or this fresco last for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We need to get some of those out there so that they don't buff us out, huh? Would be nice to do a graffiti fresco. Whoa, wouldn't that be something? But moving on along, after a lot of the spiritual Native American frescoes and, markings on the wall, we have the most famous fresco or the most famous mural, which is the Sistine Chapel. That's the one in Italy. So Michelangelo, Leonardo, a lot of these Renaissance were well known for their frescoes. Now, what exactly were murals used for besides spiritual, connecting with the animals and connecting with, the culture or storytelling? If you ever studied codices, it was a language. Codices are markings or murals where you put the whole story of a king or an emperor on the wall through symbols. Another hieroglyphics with the Egyptians, and we also have the concept of storytelling, but from a perspective of, you got to remember, back in way back hundreds or not thousands of years ago, the spoken language was one thing and the written language was another. So there were a lot of countries or continents or country where language was just, some people knew it, some people didn't. So they had to educate people, and the best and easiest way to educate people was through storytelling, through murals. And who else did it? The colonizers. That's right. The churches or the colonizers who would indoctrinate or try to storytell. They would be the ones that, sort of how you go into a chapel and then you look on the ceiling and you'll see a story. The story of Moses, or the story of, Jesus turning water into wine, or fish out of, whatever the story or whatever the story is. It's easier to put it in a narrative format than to try to, especially with pictures. For those of you guys that don't know, we do think in pictures. So whenever we think of an idea or a concept, it comes in the form of pictures. And then from there, we sort of make sense of it. So murals are used for storytelling. And this is something that, for me, as a muralist, I learned right away. I learned this from day one about public art, that it was not for me at least, it was not about just putting the same thing over and over. It was about, what am I trying to say? And that was my understanding of murals. Right after the Mexican Revolution, and when Mexico decided to try to again share its narrative of what happened, so it used murals in their official buildings to tell the narrative of how Mexico, to bring pride and instill patriotism back into the people, So Diego Rivera, who I just mentioned, does a lot of narrative storytelling. He's well known because of, Frida Kahlo, who is now an icon in Dia de los Muertos, and she's an amazing artist. We also have Siqueiros, that is innovator in, like I said, in materials, in how he basically likes the idea of perspective, looking at everything from all angles, turning around and feeling like you're immersed in the mural. He was also the inventor of enamel, so he combined sand. If you look at his painting, he has sand, dirt, all kinds of materials into his canvases. He experimented with with like the airbrush in a gun to do murals, enamels, glass, powdered glass in the material. Big innovator to Siqueiros. Also Orozco. Orozco for me is the one that's probably the underrated, and that's probably why I like him. He's missing a hand. And he lost that hand when he was a child during a firework. He worked doing fireworks, and boom, one of those fireworks exploded in his hand. So he lost his hand. From what I heard, I think one of his uncles kept it, something like that, and was going to, keep it as an ornament. But anyways, what I love about Orozco is that Orozco paints the image of of what's happening with El Rico, or the rich, or the economic shift between the poor and the rich, and he does it with expressions. Like you see the rich kind of like, with little, a little chubbiness, and they're always kind of overweight because of gluttony, and sometimes he'll do them, really grotesque, while Siqueiros, and maybe not Siqueiros, maybe more Diego Rivera, will paint things a little more smoother and a little more toned down. Really quick, the murals in Mexico became also very popular here in the United States. And the main reason why is because, like I said, we wanted the federal buildings here in America in the 1930s. We wanted to also begin to share a narrative. So rich people like Rockefeller commissioned Diego Rivera to come in and do a mural about at the Rockefeller Center. Those of you guys that I hope that you guys go further into these subject matters, because these subjects are very deep. There's a lot of YouTube videos on this, a lot of information. So, this is designed to be a radio. So, go research a lot of this yourself. And Diego Rivera did the Rockefeller Center. We have Siqueiros, who did América Tropical, which is in Placita Olvera, where they wanted something tropical, something that said, Hawaii, look at us, beautiful sunshine. And then he kind of flips it on everybody and does a crucified indigenous person, while the American eagle sort of, hovers above. And that didn't sit well with the commissioners. And there is where we begin our sort of like political whitewashing, if you want to call it. Yes, let's call it whitewashing. Where whitewashing is a concept where it has double meaning. Whitewashing is when they just literally take primer and roll white paint right over your mural. And in the Diego Rivera case, he had done Stalin, and they had told him change it. We don't want Stalin. It's communist. He refused to change it, and they eventually, whitewashed it. It also, the other meaning about whitewashing is the idea of people, white people, trying to, erase cultura or erase culture. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So, getting first introduced to what's called the WPA, which stands for Work Progress Administration. That basically meant that in the Great Depression hit in the 1920s, and by the 1930s, artists needed to be employed. So they created the WPA, and in 1935 to 1943, they began to commission muralists, or sometimes they were just painters. They weren't even muralists; they were painters, to paint public buildings like libraries, post office, federal buildings with murals. And most of these images, obviously, are censored. They're not, they're not going to do anything political. So most of them are, of how the railroad was created, or farmland was created. And one most famous painter in that era was like Thomas Benton, which is a really, I love his work. Thomas Benton, he has a very iconic style of depicting people. I think another person that I love, I don't know if he was influenced by Thomas Benton, but he's one of the artists that I admire a lot is Charles White. Also Charles White, in case you're wondering, studied under the Mexican muralism. So this is where kind of you can say there's a cross-pollination even in culture between African American artists and Mexican painters, and Thomas Benton was also a big influence on Jackson Pollock. And we'll talk a little bit about that once we start playing our music. Okay, so again, there's a lot going on during this mural, both in Mexico as well as in the U.S. in the 1930s and 40s. I don't know if you hear too much about 1950s, because then by the 1950s, you're starting to get a lot after World War II. You start getting a lot of the European painters from Europe who are fleeing Europe because of the war, and they're coming to the U.S., establishing the abstract expressionist movement. Now, this is one thing that I've always had beef with, that's me, that people who come from Europe, painters, who are not born in America, they come, they live in New York, they paint, and then they're being classified as American artists. While artists of Asian or African American or of Mexican American who are born here, they have to add the Puerto Rican American or African American, or why are we not American? Well, maybe that's something we should talk. Are we not American if we're born here? Well, I don't know. But anyways, that's another topic to discuss. But that was always what? They were not even born here and they're getting called American. But anyways, that's where American art comes from the Europeans that left World War II, and now they're beginning to introduce abstraction. Okay, now abstraction, some people might say, what do you think about murals that are abstract? Murals that have no narrative. They're just strips of color, bands of color that were introduced in the early 1960s and 70s as part of this, again, this architectural color design. All right. Thank you guys for joining me here on Instagram Live. We are moving forward. As you can see, it's very hectic to try to get this show on the radio, live on the radio, and try to compact so much information. Okay, we were just talking about some of the Mexican painters. Let me give you a list of my favorite. My favorite painters are Juan Gorman. I don't know if you guys ever seen his work. Jean Charlotte. I love Jean Charlotte's work. If you guys ever get familiar with who Jean Charlotte is, Jean Charlotte is a painter who's very stylized, makes all his images look very very heavy, like almost like they're made out of rock. But another, I guess you would call him a second generation that every Chicano loves, or a Mexican American muralist loves, is Jesus Helguera. Jesus Helguera is a calendar artist who did the Mujer Dormida, who did the Aztec holding the lady, That's Jesus Helguera. He also does a lot of calendar art. If you were a Chicano growing up in the 60s and you had a panaderia calendar of a bakery, you probably grew up watching Jesus Helguera's art. But my favorite muralist of all time for me is none other than Jorge González Camarena. That's my favorite. When I first got to see Jorge González Camarena, I was blown away. He has the ability to sort of incorporate cubism. Actually, my current color schemes come from Camarena. Very illustrative, very detailed. He knows how to render the illusion of rock and fire and stone really eloquently. Almost makes it look like everything is burning from within, and there's glimpse of he's famous for that painting of a jaguar jaguar fighting a Mexican eagle on the sky. Very beautiful, beautiful mural. In case you're wondering, my favorite, one of my favorites, but probably one of my favorite, not in subject matter, but in his life story, is Philip Guston. If those of you guys are familiar with Philip Guston, he's the one that paints a lot of KKK members with cigars. And he doesn't paint them to endorse them, but to make people aware of the injustices of KKK, of these racist people. So Philip Guston and Jackson Pollock were friends. They were here in LA in the 1930s, and together they both left to New York to pursue abstract painting. But they painted murals. That's right. They both painted murals here in Los Angeles. You guys didn't know that, huh? And Philip Guston had a very, very beautiful style in the very beginning. He painted a lot of children with hats, and he painted his a lot of I guess you would call them like scenes of like of a urban setting. And when he left to New York with Jackson Pollock, they pursued the abstract because that's what was in. So his colors and his, they kind of changed. He became more into the pinks and Jackson Pollock. You already know the all around drip painter. But what I love about Philip Guston is that eventually he got kind of burned out about abstraction, and he's kind of like was saying how many you gotta outgrow, and it's always a good idea to reinvent yourself, even though you're selling your work and you don't care. So that's what he did, and obviously a lot of abstract painters, stopped talking to him. But anyways, and I love that because that's the story of my life as a painter. I have reinvented myself several times, so I am not up and coming artist. I am a rediscovering artist. I'm a rediscovered artist because I've already had 3 different genres that I've been a part of, and all 3 of them I was doing fairly well, and I decided to reinvent myself, drop those, and move on. And I'll get into that in my next one. So let's get back to the radio because we're back on the air. All right, we are back. Thank you guys for joining us. It's J.D. Estrada here on Soul Radio. We're trying to pack a lot of information in this short amount of time. And as we can see, time is just slipping away. So we just finished talking about Los Tres Grandes. And now we're moving into how Los Tres Grandes influenced the U.S. by doing murals. And we left off that they were whitewashed. Censorship. Now, why do you think that happens? Well, I have my opinions as to why I think it happens, but realistically, everybody always has an agenda. Even though public art is public art, and a lot of muralists do want to paint what they want to say. In reality, when someone is commissioning you to paint a mural, they're going to tell you more or less what to paint. And like I say, from my personal opinion, I have yet for someone to give me a wall, except for in the realm of graffiti. But in the world of somebody paying you, especially when they're paying you a lot, they're always going to tell you what to paint. Let me see your concept. This is what I want. And that's kind of what happens when you get commissioned in the world of art. So here we are in the 1960s, now moving in when now the, I guess you would say, civil unrest is happening here in the United States. The whole thing with the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War gets started, and then now we have protesting. Now we have civil rights movements occurring with Martin Luther King, which we know a little bit about that. And then, so how does that influence the mural world? Well, because in public art, you're able to use murals to tell a story. And unlike what we mentioned earlier, that in the 1960s in New York, they were doing decorative murals. And 2 of the main companies that were known for doing the decorative murals was City Walls Inc., and this is in the 1960s. Another one was Smokehouse Association, which were companies that just did decorative art, stripes, and lines to sort of like, there's no narrative. Okay, so here during the resistance now, we have a narrative. We have a reason to say something. So one of the most biggest, I guess you would say, movements was the moratorium, the Chicano moratorium that happened in East LA in protest of the Vietnam War, where a lot of muralists got together and started painting murals to sort of show what was going on. And one of those muralists, in case you're wondering, is Carlos Almaraz. And I want you guys to go and check out his documentary called Playing with Fire. It was on Tubi. I don't know if it's still there. I saw it on Tubi recently. But Carlos Almaraz, his story is amazing. Goes to New York, comes back, decides to work for Cesar Chavez and do more murals about protests, especially like wine, protesting Gallo wine and all these other wine companies because they're putting pesticides in their farm, in their fields, and we have a whole mess of stuff. I had the privilege of working and meeting Elliot Pinckney. He's an African American muralist that was painting in the early 70s in South Central LA. I got to meet him, and he's one of the first, believe it or not, he is one of the first muralists that I saw in South Central. He was painting murals about Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, and that inspired me to do graffiti similar to that. The other thing you have happening in the 1970s, besides the movimiento, is in New York you have the graffiti movement happening. People who were painting on the trains in the 70s, and that was their names and the evolution. That could be we could do a whole talk just on the evolution of graffiti. But here in Los Angeles, we did have graffiti in our version in the 1970s, which was called Chicano graffiti, or we would call them placas, which was a hybrid of gang writing with calligraphy. I did placas probably in 1976 when I lived in South Central. I was part of a little group there, and I saw how they were doing their writing, and then I would obviously learn how to do the gang writing and Old English. I didn't pursue that because I personally got more influenced by New York graffiti in the 1980s. Now this is where you get in the world of like museums and galleries, it gets controversial because graffiti did begin with vandalism. It was we don't ask permission, and I kind of like that because when they do ads and corporations just blast these ad campaigns, no one asks permission. You see a big billboard in front of your house, nobody asks you for permission, but that's legal. But yet when we want to beautify our community, we don't have that. So that's another subject to get deep into. In the 1980s, graffiti, comes in. It evolved from a simple tag to a train, and then of course in New York, they buffed out the trains. They erased them. They went from pure white. They used to call them the white elephants, and then they got a special. They figured out how to wash them with a special acid chemical. I don't remember what it was, but they would go through this buff, and then literally the acid, or I don't know, the chemical would just wipe the graffiti right off these trains. So a lot of graffiti writers went and began to do murals on walls in New York and Chicago and all that. And that influence came out here in the 1980s. And I can actually say I was very fortunate to have seen that as early as 1981, 82. And we can go deep into the history of Los Angeles graffiti art, but I'm not going to do that because that's a long conversation to discuss. We do have a large amount of community empowerment. This is what I love about murals, is that it does empower the community to speak your mind, because remember, murals are art for the masses. It's art for the people. You can't put that in a museum. You can't, even though they tried. I know I heard about someone I heard Retina painted a mural in a restaurant, and then they knocked down the restaurant, but they removed the mural from the wall. And they wanted to sell but anyway, that's another discussion there. But, I was a part of the murals from Cesar Chavez because I got commissioned to do the Cesar Chavez murals when they changed the name from Brooklyn to Cesar Chavez. One of the things that I love about being a muralist was that it helped educate me every single time I did a mural. So, because sometimes you have to do a mural for a different culture. I get commissioned to do a Filipino history, or to do Chinese history, or to do Jewish history, and you have to paint a mural. You get deep into it. African American history. I was honored also to be a part of the mural on the Crenshaw wall there of the African American history. I think I was probably the only Latino who did that. But anyways, we're going to continue then to talk more about murals and how do we save murals, and we're almost coming to an end of our show. So this was all right, there we go. So one of the things that happened, that what the Vera Act is in New York City, there was a graffiti spot called the Cinco Puntos, Tres Puntos, I don't remember what it was called, the Walls of Fame. It was a building that had legendary murals, Zephyr, Revolt, all the legends, and the mural just got whitewashed, and these artists sued, and they won because they were protected by the Vera Act. And what exactly is it? Is basically they're supposed to give you, the owner of the building who owns it is supposed to give the artist a 90-day notice that the mural is going to be removed. There is technology, in case you guys didn't know, there is technology out there where you can remove the murals and put them on rolls of like canvas and roll them up and take your mural somewhere else. There's already been situations where they moved several murals. There's been a case where they removed the mural in East LA, repaired the wall. This is from one of the Street Capers mural, and then they put the mural back on. These are the things that I always wish technology would just focus on. Okay? Now, I'm going to end this show because we only got a couple of minutes with how do we end it. The title of the show is called From Siqueiros to Street Art. So here's where I want to say that the evolution of murals now has evolved. And the biggest influence in graffiti art, from my experience, is back in the day, in the 1980s, we only had one brand of paint, which was Krylon. Krylon was probably the best paint we can use. That's all we had. And then you had Rust-Oleum. Rust-Oleum's a little bit, a little more industrial. And then they have Painter's Touch and a bunch of other little colors, Red Devil, whatever. But in evolution, by the 1990s, paint companies, private paint companies, they blew up with all the brands. Now you can go to Riding Dirty in La Habra, you can go to Montana and buy tons of paint. Now the opacity in some of these cans is absolutely amazing. We're talking about paint that has coverage like you wouldn't believe. So that is an innovation. Second innovation that occurred was the concept of projectors. Right now we have an advanced technology where projectors, little ones, like really small ones, for like $600-700, can project in the entire side of the building. You have the paint. You come around and kind of like a printer, just start painting your mural. That began to make everybody spontaneously become an artist. The second thing that helped spread street art, and now I'm talking about street art in case you're wondering, was the concept, and here's the whammy, gentrification. Why gentrification? Well, because gentrification is when you have a community that's predominantly Filipino or African American or Asian or Mexican American, and another, money, corporate people start investing in there or buying people out, pushing people out. They want to erase anything that has culture. And I'm talking about even hip-hop culture. If it has culture, it's leaving a trace or a mark of the community that was there before them. So it's better to erase that and create a work of art that's considered neutral. And in my book, Street art is as neutral as you're going to get. Now, obviously, not all street art is the same. Some are more, political, like Shepard Fairey. Some people are more decorative. Whatever the case may be, now Miami has all the street artists. I mean, now we have probably more street artists than we have walls. And now technology, in case you're wondering, now they have these goggles that you put on, kind of like lenses that you can project your image, your outline on the wall without a projector and just start painting. That's going to be a game changer for graffiti, game changer for murals, because now paint by numbers. Everybody's going to be able to paint anything. Social media now has been a big technological breakthrough, because now you have books, you can go to someone's Instagram and check out exactly what other people are doing, it mimic them or copy their style, and boom, now you're a graffiti writer. You can put on your goggles and do an outline that you took from somebody else, fill it in, and boom. And then the other thing that's happening in street art, in case you're wondering, is that branding is happening. That basically means if you have a brand or a company, whether it's a toy company or a t-shirt company, you can now use guerrilla marketing and brand your image, and use guerrilla marketing to project your, to promote your brand. I would personally, I can say I've been out of the loop for a while. I work mostly in my studio, but I'm aware of what's happening. So I still give props to those people that are classic. One of the artists that has always maintained a classic style, in my opinion, was like Trickster. I give props to people who have a recognizable style, like Vox and Rapid 73, people from the crews that still keep going. Props to them, because they're still pushing the classic mural graffiti from how my era was, and I personally, it's been a while since I've done a graffiti piece. I think Rapid is probably the only one that invites me to do alleys and graffiti. I think we just did a piece not that long ago with Blacklight Kings. Props to Rapid for inviting me with the Blacklight King. But I hope you guys stay connected to us. We have a social media, RadioFonicaUSA.com. We have a Raise Your Frequency webpage. Stay connected. We're about to end the show. Thank everybody who joined us on both the radio and on Instagram. We have a 3-part, body, soul, and spirit. So join us for that. My body radio is on Tuesdays at 6, and my spirit radio is on Sundays at 3. So, peace out.
As we come to the close of today's journey, remember, balance is not something you find, it's something you create. Honor your body, listen to your soul, and stay connected to your spirit. Carry this frequency with you into your art, your relationships, and the way you move through the world. And this has been Raise Your Frequency on Radio Fonica USA. Stay present, stay inspired, and keep rising.